I'm Steve Yusko, and today we have an incredibly special guest with us. He's an Emmy award-winning production, designer, lighting, and video director. He's accomplished in film and television, and he's a producer whose career spans 5 decades in the entertainment industry. He's worked with iconic artists like Elton John, Britney Spears, John Mellencamp, and the Eagles. He's been Billy Joel's creative director for nearly 51 years and started with him in Kansas City back in 1974. He's brought Billy's story to life as an executive producer for the new 2-part documentary, Billy Joel, and So It Goes, which debuted at the Tribeca Film Festival and is set to debut on Max and HBO. He also recently produced and designed the Emmy-nominated CBS primetime special Billy Joel, the 100th, live at Madison Square Garden, which won 3 Emmys, including for outstanding lighting design, sound mixing, and technical direction. We're thrilled to have him share his insights and unique thoughts into Billy's career, the art of live production, and his own creative journey. Let's welcome Steve Cohen to the Long Island Sound. Steve, so great to have you here.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So in the introduction, this is just amazing to me because you don't look that old, is you have this 51-year career collaborating with Billy Joel. I think everybody on Long Island has a Billy Joel story, but can you tell me how your creative relationship has evolved over the years when you first did his first, I think, event in Kansas City in 74?
Well, you know, it's funny because the origin story I've told a few times over the years. The more I tell it, the more I learn from it. So it's a weird sort of thing. And now, 51 years later, this documentary is out for the world to see, next month. And, it's been a process of reflecting not just, Billy's life, but my life as well, because 51 years of it has been wrapped around this world with Billy and the people that have surrounded my life. I think for me, in a nutshell, I started out as one thing, and one of the greatest joys in my life has been that my relationship with Bill has given me the opportunity to evolve from that one thing to many other things.
Right.
I started out as his lighting guy. I mean, we're talking 1974. I started a lighting company. I was 20 years old. I cold called managers all over the city and took a couple of meetings, and we landed the Billy Joel tour without a lighting system. Basically, I was sort of like a siding salesman selling product that I didn't have in the trunk of my car. And after I had landed that tour, I had to go out and rent some gear from a local lighting company and take it out on the road. And what I need to impress is that, what people think about lighting today bears no resemblance to what it was 50 years ago with huge productions and computerized lighting and video and all of that stuff. This was none of that. This was theatrical lighting instruments that looked like headlights from Volkswagens with a shell in front of them, hung from these precarious structures with me sitting behind a board running faders, in time with the music. But what I think happened was that when I went into rehearsals, I was a California kid, and I was not a big fan I was not a big fan of East Coast folk music, which is what I thought Billy Joel was. Violent new Piano Man. So Piano Man had just come out, and I wasn't, it was a Harry Chapin, Billy Joel, folk song thing. I was an Eagles guy. I was a Linda Ronstadt guy. I was a Jackson Brown guy. I was a prog rock, give me Yes, give me, give me that kind of stuff. Jethro Tull, I slept out.
Pink Floyd.
Pink Floyd, all of that. Yeah. So it was a little too quaint for me and a little too just not up my alley. But I walked into this soundstage. The sound stages were just about to be torn down at that time. There's been a resurgence in Hollywood, but at the time, 20th Century was going broke, and they were using it for rock and roll rehearsals. And there's Billy set up with his original band, the band I met at the time, which was Tom Whitehorse on pedal steel guitar. He played pedal steel that went through a Leslie, so it sounded like
wow. Sure.
Doug Stegmeyer was the bass player. Don Evans was the guitar player, and Reese Clark was the drummer. And there's Bill sitting behind the piano. And I set up my gear, and I had listened to the Piano Man record, and a couple of songs kind of piqued my interest. And he sits down and starts to play the Ballad of Billy the Kid.
Oh, yeah.
And this wall of orchestrated sound came at me. And
Okay.
I was like, what the hell is this? This isn't Piano Man. This is as big and as cinematic as any of the music that I loved. So I was able to interpret that through lighting. My whole thing about lighting was all about composition and attention. I'd paint a pretty picture, but when the
Mm.
piano would come down to the most intimate moments, all the lights would go out and there'd be a single spotlight on the piano. And I had a natural flair for the theatricality of lighting as it related to music.
Mm.
Billy saw that. I didn't know he saw it at the time because at the time I was just pulling the shit out of my rear. I didn't know what the hell I was doing.
Right.
So fast forward to we load the truck up. We do the first show in Kansas City. Show's over. I'm loading the truck, and Brian Ruggles, who hired me, who was Billy's sound engineer, is still my best friend to this day,
Nice.
pulls up in his Cutlass, the rented Cutlass, and says, Billy wants to see you. And I'm convinced I'm getting fired.
Of course.
It's like I knew, because he walked off stage and he was angry about something. And I just think that was it.
Right.
So I get in the car, and at the time he was staying at a Holiday Inn. Remember those Holiday Inn courtyards where there was a pool in the
Oh,
center,
sure.
a motel?
Yep.
So I get out of the car, and they're sitting around the pool, and there's a bottle of Kahlua and a bottle of vodka on the table because they were
Okay.
Black Russians. That was the drink.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Bill goes, you want a drink? And I said, yeah, sure. Because I'm thinking this is the end.
This is the kiss of death, right? Yeah.
So he pours me a drink, and they're all looking at me, the guys in the band. And I'm like, what's going on? He says, we've been sitting here talking about this, Steve, and we figured the set list was the same. The songs were the same. The band was the same. The sound was the same. And yet we got reactions through the show that we'd never gotten before.
Wow.
And by process of elimination, we figured it must have been the lighting. So welcome aboard. And
Oh, my God.
And it was sort of like, really? So they recognized what I had done. I had recognized that I had actually contributed, and we were off. Like that was about as deep as the conversations got. And for the next, we finished that tour. There was some political bullshit between the company and not getting paid and this and that. And
Right.
I wasn't asked back. And then the promoter in Salt Lake City said, you got to get that guy Cohen back because the lights suck now. So they rehired me. And I never looked back. I moved to New York after the end of that tour in 1975 and went to work in the office with Billy's wife at the time, who was his manager, and this organization of kids, hoodlums, basically.
Right.
We went on the road. I took over the role of, I did production management because,
You were there.
I was there. I sort of knew production, and I was basically, I'll do it. It was like, it was almost like that. Let's put on a show. Like you can sew the costumes and you can advance the dates.
Right.
And I'll tell you, it was very much like that. There was a very much of a us against the world feeling at the time. The company was called Home Run. It was a home run agency. It was working out of Billy's apartment on 92nd Street in Manhattan. It was Bill. It was his wife. It was his, John Small, who was his, his wife's first husband, who was the drummer in the Hassles, who, became part of the management team. And we went out on the road. Dennis Arfa came in at that point, I think he's just about to be named on the Long Island Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So it was that group. And what ended up happening was that as anything visual needed to get done, it would fall in my lap. This is years before MTV, and promotional videos were basically done for Europe. Europe, all the bands would do promotional videos. And Elizabeth was really smart because at the time she got tour support from CBS International. The domestic label didn't want to support us. So she had relationships with, at that time, Walter Yetnikoff, who was the head of CBS International, and she, who then became the big head of CBS.
Right.
And she was able to tap into an international budget so that we could go international and then take that money and tour around the United States for tour support. But in order to do that, we needed to provide some product So those very first early videos, the 52nd Street videos, the Glass
yeah.
Houses videos, the Songs in the Attic black and white videos, I directed all of those
Oh,
because
cool.
they fell into I was the visual guys. Instead of going out and hiring Martin Scorsese, because first of all, Billy hated to be in front of the camera. You know,
Interesting.
he didn't like doing television. So because it was me and we was all in house, it was like, okay, Steve, go set up cameras because, I trust you.
Right.
So, when you talk about my evolution as lighting designer, production manager, then, creative director, which is what my role is now, it was an evolutionary process, but it was a lot of, yeah, I'll do it. Yeah, I'll do it. Sure, I'll do it. And I had no fear. And I also had an incredible amount of support and trust from both Billy and Elizabeth.
Mm.
They saw something in me I didn't see.
Oh, wow.
And I, because I'm a people pleaser and wanted to make everybody happy, I showed up and did the best I possibly could. With that trust and with that evolution, it's like a family. You start to feel comfortable that that guy over there is going to do that. And, for good or for worse, as the success started to grow, the desire to keep the inner core insulated becomes more important.
Right. The
Outside
circle of
people,
trust.
circle of trust. Outside people coming in is more frowned upon the bigger that you get. And Billy, of all of his qualities, is loyal to a fault. Like he's,
Mm.
he will back you sometimes to his own
Detriment. Yeah.
detriment.
Yeah.
And he's gotten screwed because of that.
Yeah.
Because he'd rather have the people around him that he trusts, that he knows. Because it's one thing that he doesn't have to think about because he's too busy, in that head creating all of this magic for all of us. So that sort of encapsulates the growth of my relationship. Later on, obviously, as things got bigger and as technology got bigger and as the outlets got bigger, that circle of trust got tighter and I became even more trusted as a trusted
Mm.
advisor. A, because I delivered, and B, because we had developed this shortcut. He didn't have to explain things to me. He knew that I knew what he liked. He knew that I
Right.
knew what made him comfortable and uncomfortable. And I was very sensitive to where he was thinking. There's a lot of times when Billy will say one thing, but not mean that. And if you, for whatever reason, and if you're keyed into that, you don't have the problem of making mistakes and doing things that you have to undo later on. So it's just that relationship that developed over the years.
You know what's so interesting? It's in you explaining that relationship. It's definitely like you're this third band member, right? Bringing a segment of art to it, and that communication that I see between band members. I know where he's going. I know what he really means by this. All right, he's a little pissed off, but he really didn't mean what he just said. And then you roll into it. And a couple of things as you were explaining things, I was thinking, I don't know if were you involved when he went to Moscow?
Oh
And
yeah.
did
Oh yeah.
I still remember this. He's screaming because they had the bright lights on and they had all the soldiers around and everyone's sitting there like really uptight. And he's like screaming to shut the lights off. So to me, that speaks volumes.
Steve, he threw the piano at me. Oh
Jesus.
yeah, he threw the piano at me. I've told that story a few times, and there's a few different iterations of that story. And in the documentary, we don't even allude to that. He talks about how the audience was really like, "Oh, he threw the piano." These rich Americans, like they destroy their equipment. What are they going to destroy tonight? When in reality, it was a little bit more
Intense.
tense than that. And it's funny because perception, like his perception of what was going on at the time and my perception of what was going on at the time, that was one of those instances where we looked at each other and it was like, how can we be mad at each other? He was furious at me. I was furious at him because he didn't understand what was going on. And at the
Right.
end of the day, we just kind of like collapsed and went, isn't this funny? Let's throw some furniture around in the dressing room so everybody thinks we're really having a fight. But oh yeah, no, I was so when the house lights came on after he threw the piano, I stood at the lighting console and was surrounded by the international press because
Wow.
they were trying to figure out what the hell was going on. So yeah, it's one of those memorable memories.
Hey, for this documentary that you have, Billy Joel and So It Goes, which just was premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival and will also be on HBO and Max, part one, I think, in July. What was your overarching vision? Because he's got an expansive life and career and a lot of ups and downs. What did it mean for you to take on this role? I mean, there's a lot of trust, obviously, there. But
Well,
what was your vision? And
well,
how long did it take?
well, here's absolutely make it clear that this film was made by two women, by Susan Lacey and Jessica Levin. My role as creative director in the origin of this project was basically I was Billy's proxy on how to get this project started. And one
Okay.
of the things that in the origin story that may be interesting to the listeners is that, there was a lot of interest in doing a Billy Joel biopic over the years and doing a Billy Joel documentary. And he had been approached and I had been approached multiple times by multiple directors and studios and to do it. And there was never any appetite because the story wasn't finished. We were in the middle of
Okay.
Madison Square Garden run. There was no real logical reason to do it. And he was basically not very much interested in pulling back the curtain or in really, talking about all of this stuff. He didn't find it, he's never found any of that stuff very interesting and has always been, let the music speak for me.
Right. Yeah.
My life is so it was really sort of a question of timing. The idea of doing this particular documentary came to me through some friends of ours, Sean Hayes of Will and Grace, and his partner Todd
Yeah.
Milner had been wanting to do something with me and doing something with Billy for a long time, and they had an idea about maybe presenting a documentary, and they came up with an approach. I ran it past Bill, and for some reason at that particular day, he was like, "All right, let's take this baby out for a walk and see what happens." So prior to that, I had been met by, I had a call from Susan Lacey. And Susan Lacey, who you may not know, started American Masters about 30 years ago. She was the person who invented the American Masters for PBS, which meant
Okay.
she was at the helm of 50 or 60 films of artists, architects, photographers, and produced and directed some of those incredible 1 hour specials that populated PBS for so many years. She then left and went to HBO and did an overall deal and had directed 4 documentaries for HBO. She was just finishing Jane Fonda in 5 acts.
Hmm.
She lives in Sag Harbor. I live in East Hampton. She
Right.
called up. She said, "Let's have lunch." So we sat down, and she'd always wanted to do a Billy Joel show, and we got along like a house on fire.
Oh, nice.
I told her some inside stories. She told me about her family and her classical training and where she had come from, and I thought that there was a really nice symbiosis between the two of them. And I said, "But he's not ready to do it. But when he's ready to do it, we'll talk."
Okay.
So fast forward. Todd presents this to me. Billy says, "Let's take this baby out for a walk," and then 2 weeks later, Todd calls me up. He says, "Hey, I got an idea. I had a phone call yesterday from Gary Getzman at Playtone, Tom Hanks's partner, and they said they'd very much like to jump in and produce this film with us. Are you interested?" And I said, "Oh, well, let me think about that for a minute. Tom Hanks, Gary Getzman, Playtone.
It could work.
Yeah, I think so." And they said, "Well, they want to do it, but they have a suggestion on who they would like to direct." And they said, "And it's a woman." I said, "Wait a minute. Don't tell me. Let me guess."
Right.
Susan Lacey. So HBO and Tom Hanks's relationship was very long. Susan Lacey had a relationship with HBO. I called Susan the next day. I said, "The gods are conspiring. We need to do this." So I met with her again, and then I talked to Bill, and I said, "I think this is if you stack all of these things up, you have Susan Lacey, HBO, Tom Hanks." Susan Lacey's incredible history as being a patron of the art, an appreciator, truly an artistic appreciator. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. Someone who understands the value of art,
Works for
wants
me.
to tell that story.
Right.
It feels like this is a movie, A, that can get made, and B, that we don't have to produce ourselves. I said, "But one of the things you have to be totally committed to, Bill, is that if we go down this road, we have no editorial control.
I was just about to ask you
It's
about
an
that.
independent film because Susan will not make a film as a hagiography. She won't do this if she can't make an honest film. it doesn't make sense for you to do this unless you're willing to tell the whole story. So let's just make that decision from the beginning. And Bill thought about it, and he said, if we're going to do this, let's do it right. He said, I don't want to tell my story ever again. Let someone else tell that story.
Interesting. Yeah, yeah.
And that was the basis for how this film developed. So my role in all of this was really a facilitator as Billy's spokesperson, I was able to guide the informational flow. And what I meant by that was not to editorialize any of it, but to present the filmmakers with the necessary information and the archives and the history and all of those little stories, send them down roads to be able to expose parts of Billy's story that were never told before, that may have been under discussed, that I felt and that Billy felt were pertinent to telling the story about his music. After that, we had no real creative involvement. I mean, let's be honest. I have an opinion. So my opinions were listened to and were trusted and were respected by Susan. What ended up happening is that Susan had a producer named Jessica Levin, who about a quarter of the way into this process realized that she was intrinsic and very important in telling this story, because Susan was a Billy Joel fan from a distance, but not really a Billy Joel, did not have Billy Joel in her DNA. Jessica, on the other hand, lived Billy Joel from the time she was a kid. So she brought Jessica in, who's also a great filmmaker, and the two of them co-directed the project. And what ended up happening was you got the best of both worlds. You got Susan Lacey's elevated sort of 30,000-foot altitude overarching story, and then an emotion. And then you had Jessica, who also had her overarching story, but had the institutional knowledge of all of the Billy Joel history combining together to tell this narrative. And I really, at the end of the day, worked very hard to maintain a separation between the Billy Joel and the filmmakers, and at the same time helped them as much as possible in just the actual producing of the film. Most of the interviews Billy did in my house, because we created a comfortable environment for him to do his interviews. He started out this film not wanting to do any interviews. He said, all archives. We've got archives.
There's enough on me, right? Yeah.
There's enough on me. And Susan was not going to take that. Susan was like, all right, well, whatever you want, but I still got to sit down with you. And 3 interviews turned into 4 interviews, turned into 5 interviews.
Oh, nice.
And at the end of the day, she was able to get him to talk about things that he's never talked about and go places that he really has never gone, always with a mind to it, coming back to the film, coming back to the music, that the story is all about how his life experiences informed his writing, and his life experiences informed his music.
It's amazing to me. And I think to look at Billy and being an older man now, as you look back on your life, hey, let's face it, a lot of artists want to control the brand, want to control the messaging, there's value in that. But then I'll say maturity, maybe it's not the right word, to look back, yeah, my life wasn't perfect. I had these difficulties. I went down this road. They talked about suicide and about alcoholism and stuff like that. And I'm asking myself, do I want that skeleton to come back out of the closet? But when you want people have a clear picture of you, of the ebb and tide of your life, the ups and downs. Man, that's really, and that's why I like doing podcasts. What we do is getting that presence of somebody behind.
Yeah, listen, I think it's a lot of courage. I think it's very brave. He is an incredibly prolific artist that had a finite catalog. Like he produced this amazing body of work and then stopped doing it. He stopped writing because he had said everything he needed to say, and then continued on to, do a classical record and be able to do his romantic classical piano music. But then after that, basically, he had closed the book on, producing new material from his heart. And I think he struggled with that thing, not having that outlet.
Right.
And I think that with all of us, we grow and we make peace with that if we're healthy enough to survive it. And then there comes a point when why not, talk about it? Why not let people know more? I listen, I'm really we've known each other a very long time. I can say I know him really well. He can say he knows me really well, but I don't know what goes on deep down inside and what his motivations are. I think sometimes he is as simple as anything and as complicated as anything. And I think for him to finally get to a point where he's comfortable lifting the hood on these stories, I think that's a testament to being courageous. And also another gift to his
Yeah,
to
sure.
his fans. Like, Christie talks about this in part 2 in the documentary where, he railed against MTV because he wanted the music to just paint the air. Well, the first part of this film, part 1, is all about the songs he wrote during his relationship with his first wife and manager, Elizabeth.
Hmm.
And, there's been speculation that these songs were about her, but, it's now definitive. It's now, in the film that these songs were written about her and about that relationship. He spent many years distancing himself from that fact
Mm,
so as not
interesting.
to take your and my ability to make those songs about our lives, not about
Right.
specifically his life. So, there's Crazy Like a Fox, he's,
Yeah, I can't agree with you more. I speak to a lot of creative people, and I never ask them what is this song about particularly, because you want to leave the imagination of the listener to make it their own soundtrack to a certain degree. But also, if you look at success and separated from creativity, I think these creative artists, these creatives really begin to get wired that way. And you can't say, hey, my time is over.
right.
Look, Paul Simon is out touring
No,
again.
I mean,
Uh, yeah, I saw Willie Nile. He's 77 years old, did a rock and roll show in Manhattan that blew me away. He looked like a 35-year-old running around and unbelievable guy. And
yeah.
I'm like, that's what's so great about music is,
Yeah. And I'll tell you, that's the passion. The thing about Bill and what you learn in this film and what Susan and Jessica have so deftly uncovered is that, that this music and these melodies and these lyrics are a true reflection of this man's life experience in the language that this guy lives. He talks about, he doesn't, do a lot of metaphor and there's not a lot of simile. He writes like he talks and he
Okay.
and he writes like he thinks. Part of the reason that the critical that he bumped up against the critics for so long, and Bruce Springsteen talks about this in the film. He says,
Mm,
anything that Billy did that was, not too rock and rolly enough, the critics like bumped up against because it was, Billy's writing was mature and fully formed and very much, American songbook classic stuff that the rock and roll critics bumped up against. And I think that, part of the thing with the long lasting success that's happened over the years is, the public came to appreciate them for what they are. And Springsteen again says in the film, he says, that's why these songs aren't dated. These songs feel like
right.
they're current because they're not steeped in a time and a place. They are universal. And I think that, Billy didn't know any different. Like this was how he wrote and this is what he liked. He talks about this a lot in the film where he says, I when after The Stranger came out and it was an undeniable success, and then
Hmm.
52nd Street came out and it was a monster hit, he really didn't care about it anymore. It was like, I can do what I can write for me. I can write for, I can write the things I want to listen to. And if you like them, great. And if you don't like them,
Screw you.
you, right? And I think we're all we reap the benefits of that because what we've got is a body of work of these songs that, I mean, you pick a Billy Joel song. I don't think any life experience that I've ever had cannot be attached or aligned with a particular Billy Joel lyric. And I don't think that there's too many people out there who disagree with that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I've seen artists who reinvent themselves. Okay.
Right.
And Billy, in my mind, has not reinvented himself, but he's been progressive in exploring what he wants to say. And Rick Rubin, you know, I saw the famous producer, you know, he says, don't write for the audience, write for yourself, write what you love to do. And, you know, people will find it, you know, and it's an interesting place to go with all the pressures of being successful, however you define success, and however the critics want to put you in a genre box as a pop guy, as a rock guy, or, hey, this is trending now, write this type of thing. Kudos to him for remaining strong.
Yeah, and I think that what one of the joys of being involved with a film like this and being involved with a career like this is that it's singular and it's lasted. You know, there are very few. There's a handful of artists that that have this kind of legacy behind them, and there's even fewer of them that have a finite catalog. You know, God bless all the other guys, all the other septuagenarians who keep putting records out. Billy stopped writing, you know, in the late '90s, and you know, so all we have are these 160 some odd songs from him. We're not going to get any more. And you know, there is.
Why do you say that? Why do you say we're not going to get any more? Is he?
He's done writing.
He's done. Okay.
Closed the
Closed
book.
the book. All right.
He said, you know, as he says in the film, I said everything I needed to say in songwriting. I got nothing more to say. And there is a quote in the film from Sting who says, you know, at some point you've got to be a philosopher and be silently stoic. And I think that, you know, I think that there's a great deal of respect that comes from that. Not to take away from any of the other artists that continue to produce.
Right.
In Billy's case, you know, if I'm armchair psychologist, I think, you know, it was very tough, and he basically realized at some point, and he says this in the film, that he didn't have to say it anymore, that the music could speak for it. And you know, his compositions in abstraction, in classical music, you know, we may get some more classical music out of him, we may get some more instrumental music out of him, but at the end of the day, the catalog is something to be cherished. And at this moment in time, I think that this film is going to define, for a lot of non-Billy Joel fans, or a lot of casual Billy Joel fans, the depth of this artistry. I mean, Susan and Jessica have really unlocked, you know, and everybody else involved with the film, the editors, they've really unlocked so much. And one of the things that I want to say is that when Billy saw the film, he wrote Susan and Jessica that he had discovered a part of himself that he'd never seen before. And for me, if I'm a documentary filmmaker, you know, if I was Susan, that to me is the home run of the home run. Because if your subject learns something from the way you've told their story, that's something. That's something very special. It shows vulnerability and on his part to be able to open up to something like that. But it also shows a great deal of talent in storytelling and in creating a narrative around someone's life, which is what they've done.
A storyteller appreciating a storyteller.
Right.
You know, it's interesting as well. And, you know, in hindsight, looking in the rearview mirror, his health struggles now, you know, timing, but also how many boxers and Sinatra and all those which you just said, you know, people were saying, "Oh, I wish you just didn't go up on stage anymore." Right. You know, you're killing it for us.
Right.
Hey, I want to talk about one other guy too, because I've heard all different folklore stories, and you know, as we get older, we can't hit all the notes that we used to be able to hit. But Mike Del Giudice is a Long Island guy, and for people who don't know, Mike, I'll tell a quick story. Mike has been playing with Billy Joel, has the same voice as Billy Joel, I guess you could say, right? And could hit the notes that Billy couldn't hit anymore. And they found each other and changed this guy's life. This guy was ready to go back to landscaping.
Right.
Literally. But anyway, I just wanted to mention him because he's a real sweetheart guy who has his own stuff too.
Well, no, and I'll tell you, Mike, you know, it's how these things work out. You know, Mike came along at exactly the right moment.
Okay. Just like you.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, the line about, you know, him hitting notes that Billy can't hit anymore One of the things that I like to point out to people is whenever you listen to any of these Billy Joel records, you notice that what Phil Ramone did with him, certainly from The Stranger on, is that Billy would always double his vocals. He'd always sing a vocal and then sing another vocal on top of it.
Okay.
So what ended up happening with Mike was that, they were replicating, and Brian Ruggles had a big thing to do with this as the sound engineer, is that they were replicating the stylistic thing that Phil Ramone and Bill had developed in the studio.
Okay.
So he wasn't just hitting notes that Billy couldn't hit. He was doubling Billy's vocals, which I hate to say it, a lot of these artists these days have to do that with a box.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
sample and you have, you have so-and-so's vocal and then the sample vocal. So this was live. And I think one of the things that really freed Billy up is that it wasn't so much that Mike was replacing Billy, but he was reinforcing it for the live concert experience. It was genius. I mean, the fact that
Mm.
that he's a multi-instrumentalist. We had a bass player who had COVID. Mike sat and played bass without a rehearsal for the entire show. So,
That's great.
he's that good. Not to mention the fact that he's a really great singer. He's got moments in the show when he sings opera, and
Right,
that was
Mona Lisa.
like we
Yeah.
saw a YouTube of him doing it, and we were like, we should put that in the show before Italian Restaurant. Like he became another part of the Billy Joel live experience.
Nice.
So, I think, the stunt vocal that Mike got is incorrect. I think he was and is as much a part of the overall, quality of that show that anybody is. So
Yeah. I didn't mean to, by the way, disparage Billy
no,
on
no, no,
that.
no,
But
I-
that's,
not at all. I'm just saying that anytime I get an opportunity to clarify something like this, I
Good.
like to do that. So
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Hey, I want to switch, Steve, I want to switch gears a little bit. And I want to talk about lighting. I want to talk about robotics. I want to talk about when you did, the 100th Madison Square Garden. It's a real, man, I always promote this. You know what? You hear somebody on an album or whatever, go see them live because it's going to be a different experience than anything else. But now you're challenged with taking that live event and putting it on a flat screen,
Mhm.
so to speak. Tell me how challenging it is and what kind of technology to bring it in to try to mirror that experience for the audience
Well, the
that's watching.
is a really unique example. Not
Okay.
too many people like me get to do what I did. As the creative director and the live show producer, so to speak, I controlled that budget. And then as the producer of the film, of the television special, I was able to control that budget. So basically what I was able to do was create an environment where what we put on the screen was paramount and there was no extraneous agenda. It all came from my desire to replicate that experience at Madison Square Garden for you in your living room. How I did that was I spent a lot of money in pre-production, and
Mm.
I also have two of the greatest collaborators on the planet to work with. I have a guy by the name of Mark Fafano, who is my right-hand lighting programmer, co-designer,
Okay.
who's a photographer, and Brian Ruggles, who's been Billy's sound engineer forever. And we both, the three of us, knew, what we needed to do to prioritize to try and replicate that experience. The Garden, when you went and saw Billy at the Garden, there were two performers there. There was Billy Joel and there was the audience.
Okay.
And what I really wanted to do was make sure that when you were sitting home, you felt like you were part of the audience. When that went to the selection of the director, Paul Dugdale. Paul Dugdale and I had done a few films together, and he had a particular knowledge and awareness of the kind of cinematic style that I really wanted to utilize, which was a lot of movement, a lot of depth of field in the camera, and
Mm.
also making sure that that the line between the audience and the stage disappeared. And what I did as lighting designer, and what we did, Mark and I, as the lighting team, was literally light the room the same way we lit the stage.
Okay.
And
Oh, wow.
and we knew that was the aesthetic, and then we had a cinematographer and a director who set the cameras to be able to capture exactly that they knew to place the cameras in places where the audience filled the backgrounds and you literally felt like you were on stage with Billy, or you felt that you were sitting in the middle of the room and Billy was surrounding you. And then the audio part of it, with Brian, the way he recorded it and the way it was mixed in 5.1, it was truly an immersive experience. And I'm very proud of that, because I think that particular show, we had this funny conversation, myself and Dennis Arfa. Dennis Arfa, who's been Billy's architect for live performance for years. He's been his agent for 50 years almost.
Okay.
And the show, Madison Square Garden, was coming to the end of its run. And I sat with him and I said, if we don't put this on television, we're the only ones that are going to know this happened. Yes, we did 100 shows, but my in-laws in St. George, Utah, like, they don't know the enormity of Billy Joel's run at Madison Square Garden. If we don't put it on television, it's going to be the tree that falls in the forest. I said, so we need to do that. And I said, and the other part that I had, and I fought very hard for this, was I wanted to put it on network television. I did not want it to go on Netflix or any of the streaming networks, because there was something very much, even though we had commercials on network television, there's something very Billy Joel about being appointment television on Sunday night. Like, that's our history. So, so we fought to try and make that happen, and we did. And the irony about that show was that on its broadcast on CBS, it went 1 minute over or 40 seconds over, and all the local stations cut it off before.
Right, I remember that.
It was the greatest thing ever, because it was
people freaked.
It was a big gift, because the next morning I was on the phone with all of the CBS executives who were so incredibly apologetic and like, oh, I'm so sorry. And we said, well, run it again. So we ended up getting a second airing, and a lot of people saw that show. So that was it was calculated. We wanted to give the viewer at home an experience, an immersive experience, as much as possible, and the only way we could do it was through lighting and sound.
Just a thought, because I'm thinking about, this is again weird. I come up with weird questions. I've been to early weddings, 20 years ago when video first came out, and boom, the lights go on, and I hated it because it's like you just killed everybody's buzz by throwing a spotlight on them. Now you're lighting the audience. Did you get any pushback from, okay, this could affect negatively the performance?
Years ago it did. I mean, when we did Live on Long Island, Billy was pissed off at me, just like he was pissed off about Russia. But with the Garden, it was a different story, because the way the Garden was set up, there is lights in the ceiling that are part of the Madison Square Garden architecture that they use for the basketball games.
Okay.
So we incorporated that in the show itself. So the audience was very much aware of the fact that, and we weren't lighting the audience as if to just put spotlights on them. They were in the same color. They were in the same patterns. So they literally, if you were sitting 20 rows back, you looked at your arm and you were the same color as the musician on stage. So it wasn't, we weren't just illuminating them. We were making them part of the paint, part of the palette.
Oh, that is really cool. And I have to mention this because in reading your bio, you're primarily known for working with Billy for 51 years, but you've worked with Elton John, Justin Timberlake, Britney Spears. Tell me about how the first launching pad for that happened, when those early opportunities came your way.
Well, I think, Phil Ramone was a big part of my breaking out of Billy. When he did One Trick Pony with Paul Simon, he told Paul that you've got to hire this guy. And so I went out on the road with Paul Simon, which then evolved into doing the Simon and Garfunkel reunion tour. And what ended up happening for me was that, as the industry began to expand, my relationships with people who provided equipment or who provided direction or whatever, I got introduced to managers, I got introduced to artists. And then I started to design for other artists. And I've been, the origin of these guys' career, like I did Mariah Carey's very first tour. Like, like I was sitting in Mariah Carey's apartment with Tommy Mottola going through her set list when she had just had her first record out. I did the first NSYNC tours, which led me to do Britney Spears because Justin was dating Britney. And I got involved with the Johnny Wright guys. So it became, things happen the way they happen. I was not that kind of designer that was, was sought after as a designer. I was sought after as a collaborator, and the
Okay.
fact that I would be, I was a good designer, they would get what they wanted from me, but I also was a bit of a producer all the way through. So I was never a guy who would sit down and draw something and give it to somebody and say, "You build this. I'm going to be the artiste." I was the guy who would come and draw something, design something, thinking how I could pull this off, because somebody at some point would tell me I don't have the money to do it.
Uh,
So I'd have to figure out another way to deliver that. And I was a very practical designer throughout all those years. The Elton John relationship is a personal relationship that goes back many, many years. And then, I was part of, at one point, it was sort of like, yeah, okay, Elton, hire Steve. There was a bit of, I'm not going to hire Steve Cohen because he's Billy Joel's lighting designer, because of the
right.
perceived, whatever between the two of them. And then eventually I was fundamental in, putting the two of them together.
Oh, right.
I
Yeah.
was I was sort of the I don't know, a conduit, maybe you could call it.
Okay. Right. Right.
Um, so that, and then that turned into, 20 years of touring, where I designed both of those shows.
Oh,
Um,
amazing.
but I always had an eye to production. I always had an eye to, when I would create an idea, I would think about how to execute, sometimes to my fault, that
Mm,
I wouldn't think outside of the box sometimes, because I would know it would be impossible. And I would have a lot of people urging me, no, no, push the envelope, because we pull these things off. And a lot of times I'd feel like, oh, shit, I should have done that.
right.
But, I've had a really good, very well-rounded career, doing that stuff. I lit for television. I learned how to do television for comedy. So I've done, television, specifically just television lighting, but it's been a very well-rounded sort of journey for me.
Yeah. It's amazing. Lighting to me, being an audience member, it's perfect when you don't realize it. Does that make sense?
Well, no, I mean, it's
This.
thing. It's the same thing with editing. Like, you
Yeah.
editing, if you notice an edit, it's a bad edit, so it's meant to be something that you feel, not notice.
Right, right. And that just brings it all together. I mean, I remember going to a particular concert for, I think it was Kenny Chesney. It was at the Garden. And they did this whole distraction thing where you think he's behind a screen ready to come up, and next thing you know he's behind you, and he's, and Pink, doing all these theatrics. Got to be challenging for sure,
Yeah, and I mean, listen, I got to be honest. There's an element of me feeling I'm a little old. Like I went and saw Taylor, and I actually went with Billy. We went and saw Taylor, and
Oh
we
yeah,
watched
okay.
this thing, and it's like, I don't know. I feel a little disjointed from that. I mean, I look at Beyonce and see this amazingly massive spectacle, and I think all of that stuff is really great, but a lot of it has sort of passed me by, because
Mm.
right now I'm into telling stories, and I think that I've done that, and now I'm into making films, and I'm developing television shows, and I'm doing a docu-series, and so
Oh
on.
cool.
I'm really, that's my second act. My second act is finding a way to tell stories and affect people emotionally, not in big stadiums. I've felt that it's for a younger man, I think.
I agree with you. To me, it's I forget what it reached a point in my life where it's like, you know what, give me Westbury Theater or something more intimate, where I feel closer to the artist, where I can hear their lyrics and their story and
Right.
stuff. And maybe it's an age thing, I don't know, but that intimacy. I think the great artists, not only through their music, but their stage presence,
Hmm.
their banter where it works. Some are horrible at it, some don't do it at all. And that's okay, because
Yeah.
it's interesting that there are artists, humble artists, who are great, who just want the music to speak for them. They don't need
Well,
to
and
punch it
listen,
out, right?
I mean, on the other side too, look,
Now,
before Billy took time off, we've been playing stadiums. I mean, 50, 60,000 people. And I sit there at front of house and I look around me and see people singing scenes from an Italian restaurant at the top of their lungs, 150 feet away from, the closest staircase
Right.
500 feet from the stage. And I'm like, what kind of experience are they having? And they're just in the room hearing this,
Yeah.
looking at this guy that's that big with me, making him that big on this video screen, but still it's only that big when you're that far away. So filling these big stadiums with music is not against, what I think is a good evening out, because I think it's about the collective experience
Right.
and all
Right.
that stuff. But, one of my favorite things, I'm very close with John Mellencamp, and I've done all
Oh,
of his
okay.
theater shows for the past, I don't know, 15 or so years. And it's, 2,500 seats in this intimate environment with this true artist, very dimly lit, very dramatic.
Hmm.
I love that. I think I think it draws you, you lean into that. I don't know, there's value in all of it, but I think for me, that sort of storytelling is more resonant to me. And I think, you get older and you want to make people feel things,
I got to ask you this. Obviously with lighting, there's timing, there's set lists, there's, how you have you ever got has there ever been a moment you got really thrown off where the artist decides to do something not scripted and you go, "Oh my God, get a light on him," or does that happen often, not happen much, or am I just barking up the wrong tree?
No, I mean, it happens all the time. One of
Oh,
the
okay.
things about Billy is like, you can pin him down, but he's going to throw you a curveball. I mean,
Or throw something at you.
yeah, or throw something at you. These days, a lot of the lighting is run by time code. Like the Pro Tools guy on stage will click a button and it'll
Right.
run the lighting. And I always reject that, because I believe there has to be some kind of interaction
Spontaneity.
between the button pusher and the band. And so when you take that away and you are that rehearsed, I think that
Mm.
that's great, but it doesn't interest me. I think that, the spontaneity is the thing that really makes this fun. But it's always the artist who makes fun of themselves when they screw up that I like the best. And
Right.
that,
Right.
there is nobody better at that than Billy Joel. There's a, like, halfway through a song, wait a minute, let's start that again. Like, that shit just makes you feel, it endears you to them. It makes you
Oh,
feel like
absolutely.
they're human. So I kind of look forward to that. And if I miss a cue and I get an artist yelling at me going, "Hey, what are you, work in a prison?" Daryl Hall used to do that to me all the time. He'd walk over on stage right, and I'd have shitty spot operators
Right.
hear me or whatever, and he'd be, "Hey, Cohen, you work in a prison? You couldn't stop a prison break." So it's happened. It's definitely happened.
It's an amazing thing. I tell you this, I did a spoof video where I'm like begging Billy Joel for an interview, knowing it's never going to happen. There was a scene in what was it, the golf movie with Bill Murray, where he's talking to the club,
Caddyshack.
the Caddyshack, and he's going Billy, 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 Brew, Billy. I incorporated that in to try and goat Billy. Like that's going to work, right?
All right.
But I got to tell you, Steve, this is the closest I've gotten to Billy Joel through your stories, and it's really been wonderful. Really looking forward to seeing the documentary.
Thank you. Well, listen, I think, one of the things that's great, you're a Long Islander, and, this is, I think that having Susan, be a Sag Harbor resident, and, me being out on the East End, I think that this is as homegrown a film as possible. And it's in keeping with, Billy's roots here, in Long Island. And I just think that for the Billy Joel fan, and for the person who is aware of Billy as part of, like you say, everyone's got a Billy Joel story who lives in Long Island.
Right.
I think that what these women have done in this film is given Billy a story, and given really Billy a gift that had his fans, an opportunity to feel something very, very real and very human.
Mm,
And
nice.
and you're going to learn some things about his life that, just like his songs, reflect, every man's life. And I think that that's the thing I'm most grateful for, and I feel most blessed by, is that I've been able to brush up against that for 51 years and be a part of it. So I'm glad,
Wonderful.
and I look forward to having you tell me what you think of the movie when you see it.
Yeah. Hey, let's stay in touch, and you're welcome back
Thank you.
anytime. Anybody else want to talk about the documentary? I'm happy to have him on. I really feel blessed that you were present to me today.
Oh, thanks, man. And listen, Susan
Yeah.
and Jessica may want to jump on and do it. So like I'll mention to them
Oh,
we had a great experience, and I'm sure that Samantha's in touch with all of them. And so, anything, they're just great. And it's really been an amazing experience for me. I've learned so much working with them, and I've learned so much about the craft of storytelling that it's gonna propel my next thing. So when my next thing gets ready to go, you and I'll talk, and I'll tell you.
oh my God. Yeah. So your producer has my contact information,
Fantastic.
and I keep everything tight to the vest. And
Well, I look forward to seeing this on YouTube and not being too embarrassed at how bad my
oh,
lighting is.
come on. Oh, so what are those gold discs on the wall behind you?
Well, those are some vintage things there. I mean, I think that one right there is The Stranger. I think that one is, well, here, there's Piano Man, there's Street Life Serenader, there's
Wow.
Turnstiles. So they're, mostly Billy Joel. There's some platinum ones. There's a Billy Squier. There's a Britney Spears. There's a
Nice.
Sync. There's Enrique Iglesias. So yeah, they don't exist anymore. Gold records, now it's gold streaming. So
Right.
yeah, this is sort of like my little trophy room in my little
Wonderful.
basement. So anyway,
Steve, I look forward to meeting you in person someday.
I
And
hope so too, Steve.
let's
It's
stay
great
in
talking
touch.
to
I
you.
really
Thank you.
enjoyed it.
All
All
right.
right.
Have a good one.
You too, brother. Be well.